Isle Royale has a deep history of copper ore that has long been known to the region's original inhabitants, the Ojibwa Indian tribe. The Ojibwa copper mining pits have dated back as far as 4,500 years ago. Soon thereafter, the white man discovered the copper-rich island, leading to 3 separate periods of mining operations that occurred throughout the 1800s. However, the Siskawa Mining Company was the only group that extracted significant quantities of ore, taking 95 tons of refined copper ore during a 6-year period that started in 1849. Prior to the official incorporation of Isle Royale into the United States, trappers frequented the island and found it to be quite the profitable venture, as it had large beaver population ripe for the picking. In many national parks, the original intentions of the founders are often complicated and complemented by later events. Such is the case of the wilderness of Isle Royale National Park. Its remoteness and robust forest community, its long, varied cultural heritage, and its lakeshore beauty were all perfect reasons for establishing the national park, but more was to come. In 1843, Isle Royale was officially acquired by the Ojibwa Indian tribe through one of many Indian cessations of the time. The basic idea of establishing a national park like Isle Royale did not come until March 3, 1931, when President Herbert Hoover authorized Congress to fund a prime expansion of northern wooded wilderness and make effort to conserve it. On April 3, 1940, Franklin D. Roosevelt officially established the Isle Royale National Park, which today is the least visited national park in the U.S., outside of Alaska. Major management principles that apply to our case study include intervention so impacts of threats are reduced, shifting baseline theory, and dealing with threats in long-term activity. Management principle 1 is intervention so impacts and threats are reduced. On Isle Royale, it is not known if human intervention is necessary or beneficial. The depletion of wolves on the island could cause the moose population on the island to skyrocket, which would lead to overgrazing. The next management principle is shifting baseline theory, which refers to how people perceive what is natural and unnatural. Many, many years ago, wolves weren't on Isle Royale at all. Because of this, people's perceptions of what is natural on the island is skewed. This causes problems when managing the threat because it brings into question what is natural and what isn't. However, wolves aren't technically natural on the island. The final management principle is dealing with threats in long-term activity. On the island, the possibility of hunters being brought in to control populations isn't gaining interest because of the potential environmental impacts of hunters on Isle Royale. Although other options such as tracking populations of wolves and moose on the island are being used to determine future plans of action for long-term success in managing wolf populations on the island. There are many threats facing the park today. Some direct threats to the park are the decline of the wolf population, moose overgrazing, and also many native aquatic plant species are dying off. Right now, the most direct threat to the park is that there are only 2 wolves left. Over the years, the population has been fluctuating. The lack of wolves directly affects the park because the moose population is now booming and taking over the island, which in turn is reducing the amount of shrubbery to almost nothing. So how did these problems all come about? Well, before the 1900s on the island, there were only Native Americans, beaver, and caribou. Moose came to the island sometime between 1900 and 1920. It is said that the moose apparently traveled over by an ice bridge from the mainland, or they swam over, which is an 18-mile swim from Ontario. Later, in 1948, eastern timber wolves were introduced when they walked over on an ice bridge. There was no hunting allowed in the park, and the wolves were welcome in to control the escalating moose population. The underlying problem is climate change. The temperature of the lake water has risen 4.5 degrees from 1979 to 2006, which is twice the rate of the rising air temperatures. Because the water is warmer, only 1 in every 10 winters does an iceberg form, where in the early 1900s there were bridges 8 out of every 10 winters. The indirect threat is the past and present human interaction with the 2 species. The longest-running study of predator-prey interaction started in 1958 by the National Park Service and Purdue University, which studies the wolves and moose on the island. Back in the 1900s, people socially constructed that it would be natural to have moose and wolves on the island, even though they were not native. Now people have not been able to make up their minds regarding what they should do with the wolves. and so the island and the animals are suffering the consequences. At the end of 2016, the National Park Service produced a DEIS, which is a draft of environmental impact statement, to determine whether or not the service should help the declining wolf population by directly adding new genetics to the gene pool. From the DEIS, 4 alternatives were drafted. The first was the alternative of no action. The second action, Alternative B, includes a limited introduction of wolves to the park over a 3-year time period. The third action, Alternative C, states that the National Park Service would immediately introduce wolves with the potential for subsequent introductions over a 20-year period. The final action, Alternative D, states that the National Park Service would continue to monitor conditions and take no immediate action, but allow for future introductions of wolves to Isle Royale. The decision to introduce in the future would be based on moose population metrics and other observed changes in the ecosystems. In general, Alternative B would reestablish wolf populations over the shortest time period. This is also the National Park Service preferred alternative, which would introduce 20 to 30 wolves in order to reestablish genetic diversity and redevelop predation. The process of implementation would take 3 to 5 years to fully introduce all 30 proposed wolves. There has not yet been a date set on when or whether the NPS will actually follow through with their intentions and add 30 new wolves to the island. The study of predator-prey has been going on since 1958 and no actions have been taken. This assessment of alternatives is the only successful action the park has taken. Until an alternative is chosen, we will not know if it will be successful in regulating the population.